Hello, my dear friends. Today we'll continue to deeply immerse ourselves in the intricacies of painting water. We're now ready to get down to practice. You see that I have an A3 sheet here in front of me, or to be more precise, after I fixed it with masking tape, the size of the working area is 26 by 33 centimeters. The paper is Saunders Waterford Grain Thin. Don't rush to fix your paper with masking tape on the board because you might need more time and you might want to do the first wash on paper wetted on both sides. This way you'll have more time on your hands to do all the maneuvers, which in our case will be numerous. But in my opinion, this method has its drawbacks because pigments sink into the paper much more deeply, so I don't normally wet the paper on both sides because I'm used to working fast and I don't like it when colors sink deep into the paper in double-side wetting method and they lose their saturation. However, if you choose this method, it's okay, and many artists use it to have as much time as possible to create soft transitions in the washes. Just take into account the fact that pigments will get lighter after drying. I'd also like to call your attention to the material that your board is made of. In order to keep watercolor wet as long as possible and have time to do everything you want, the board has to be plastic or plexiglass. If it's wooden or chipboard or cardboard, it will start to absorb water and then your paper will dry in no time. Alright, I'm done with the intro and now we can get down to doing the work. This time we'll of course start with pencil drawing. For the start we'll mark the horizon line. I've placed it as high as possible here because the background and the forest are not so important here and I won't paint them in much detail, as I want to pay the most attention to the stones underwater and the reflection of this very forest. I'm marking the outline and silhouettes of the trees in the background. I don't draw every bush, note that, but if we look at the reference, it's quite clearly visible where the shadows in the forest are and where the light is. I also mark the borders of our reflections. I do the pencil drawing very delicately and I don't press the pencil too strong. By the way, I'm using a mechanical pencil. It's medium soft. I start to mark the stones. I think it's important to show in our pencil drawing here where the stones are, as the stones are clearly visible here. Their boundaries are also clearly observable and they're quite big, so we can pay extra attention to them. If you don't do it at the pencil drawing stage, in the process of doing the first wash, which by the way is very important in this work, and its success has an about 50% impact on the overall impression of the work. So in order to avoid losing time trying to figure out which stones and where they are at the watercolor stage, we'll mark everything beforehand in pencil. I try not to draw every stone in perfect detail. For now, I simply mark the overall position of these stones in relation to each other. When looking at your drawing and the reference, you should be able to understand the position of the stones. This way, you won't have to spend precious time on trying to figure out what you had drawn in each particular area of the work. When all stones are placed in relation to each other and form a united image, we can move on to detailing them. I don't draw the stones in the distance in much detail either, because they're visibly smaller there and They obey the perspective laws, and additionally, they overlap with the forest reflection. So they kind of collapse into thin lines. So I start to adjust the shape of the stones. All in all, it's important that the stones have interesting shapes. They shouldn't be plain circles or ovals similar to each other. Pay attention to the fact that they all have their unique shape. That's actually the reason they look natural and interesting to look at. If I see that I didn't picture something well, I simply fix it using an eraser and draw whatever I think it should look like instead. Anyway, don't hesitate to spend more time here on doing the pencil drawing. It's not that important in some watercolor works, but in this case, these stones will be really useful if we know the position of everything. You might even not have time to look at the reference when painting, but you'll see where the stones are and apply their shadows and show light. I mean, you know by now how we create volume, so you might not need the reference that much now, but we'll talk about it a bit later. I mark the movement of the waves, the position of the reflections. Note that the waves are positioned at a slight angle. It will provide dynamics. All in all, a slight diagonal looks much more interesting and dynamic than if our waves were positioned strictly horizontally in relation to the edge of the sheet. This way, our eyes will follow the waves into the depth of the work and shift to the background.